Introduction. You already know what I am. I'm not a specialist on data nor on statistics. I'm, in fact, a policy officer. Studied law a long time ago, but I will speak about the importance of the open data and the opportunities and options they give us. Next slide, please. Before I start with that, I will tell you something about Region Food Valley. Region Food Valley lies in the center of the Netherlands. It's a region of 8 municipalities, and it was started around the University of Wageningen and all the research institutes that are concentrated there. So there is an ecosystem around food and knowledge and research, and that is supported by those 8 municipalities as a region. Next slide, please. What I want to talk about is some developments in the rural area regarding agriculture and food. Starting with demographics, we know that in the rural area, farmers are important, but that there is an enormous aging among farmers. So food supply and landscape maintenance in the future will be at stake. For there are not much followers in the farms. Young people don't want to study farming, don't want to work on a farm, and that is a threat for the whole environment in rural area. Another development is that we want to change to short change in agri-food production, regional food production, which means that there has to become some change in infrastructure in the regions and the connection between the urban areas of the region and the more aerial areas of the region. So infrastructure has going to be changed. Same is for the quality and origin of products. Use of pest control means and antibiotics is one threat of the agri-food production, and we have to know much more about them. And there is so much information which is not open available. Consumer demands on agri-food are changing. People want to know where it comes from, what quality is, who produced it. So tracking and tracing is very important, and also this generates enormous amount of data. Circular economy is growing fast, and it's necessary, but not without risk. For example, the use of residual flows in the food chain is not always permitted, and it can be a threat to pollution of some kinds of food. So we have to get much data on this and follow the development of this kind of economy, especially when it comes to agriculture and food. And one other development is that the impact on the environment of agriculture is large, we know that, but we can measure a lot of it by using sensors which are monitoring on, for example, emission reduction in livestock keeping. And one example of what this can mean, I will show you in my next slide. What we saw in our region and in the Netherlands, that there is, and you see it on the left part, there's a concentration of poultry farms in the Netherlands in 2 or 3 areas. And you see the northern part, the northern red part, it's Region Food Valley. There are many poultry farms, especially egg farms in our region. What we also know about public data is that Findest in the province of Gelderland, where Food Valley is part of, you see there's an enormous concentration of the pollution by Findest, especially in our region. And you see it on the red spot within the region. Next slide, please. Then we had to see how this could happen, what is happening. And what you see is that in general, from 1995 to 2014, the pollution by dust is decreasing in the Netherlands. But what you also see that in agriculture, it was increasing. And so we had to look at that. And then we saw that from 1995 to 2014, the pollution by poultry was increased by 10 times. And what we know about the same period is that there was a transition from a cage housing of poultry to free-range poultry. So the fact that we were getting to free range because of the welfare of the animals had an effect on the environment by increasing much fine dust, which is bad for lungs for man. And now we are seeking new techniques to reduce this fine dust again. But this shows that we need to monitor continuously developments in changing agriculture, because we can see that there are some unexpected effects of transition of agriculture. And this is just an example. I wanted to show you why we need to have data and to monitor continuously these data. Next slide, please. Another aspect of my job, and also is in Europe, is smart specialization. The European Commission has, since about 2007, I think, the policy of getting regions to be more specialized in what they're good in. They call it smart specialization, and that's a way of stimulating economy, being more competitive, etc., etc. To do this smart specialization, you have to know what you are, who you are, what your specialty is, what the amount, economic importance of your specialty is. So you need to have much data on your own region to see why you specialize and in what aspect of the economy you specialize. The same accounts for other regions. If you want to compare your region with other regions, you should need data about other regions to compare them and to see if they are competitive or they're complementary to your region. So if we want to have a good policy on smart specialization, especially in agri-food, then we need reliable data which are comparable. So some standardization of data on rural areas, and especially on agri-food areas, would be very welcome to improve this specialization policy. Next slide, please. Within this smart specialization, we have partnerships. One of these partnerships is HighTech Farming. HighTech Farming means that we want to solve all kinds of problems in agriculture by using modern techniques on reducing all kinds of environmental damage, be more efficient, be more healthy and sustainable. Well, you can do this by exchanging information about demands and developments in agriculture with the solutions technical providers have, and which are in the technical infrastructure. There is a system built in the partnership of HighTech Farming to exchange this information and to create a platform to make this information available to farmers, to policy officers, to municipalities, and national institutes. This is just a scheme of how such information can be exchanged, and that you need sometimes an innovation intermediary to bring this information together and make it available to all parties involved, all stakeholders involved. And that's such a scheme how we do this in the HighTech Farming Partnership. And this also means that we need a lot of data on agriculture, data on technical solutions, who should be opened and available to all stakeholders involved. That brings me to my next slide. And that is, I would like to make some remarks on COVID-19. One of the things we see in COVID-19 is that we have a problem in harvesting in our farms, because workers from Poland and other parts can't come to the Netherlands, and I hear the same from France and Spain, etc., etc. We don't have really good overviews about the amount of workers from abroad who are working in seasonal agriculture. So we have to have the data to be prepared on occasions like COVID. Another thing is that we have, especially in poultry, quite some experience with viruses and outbreak management. Avian influenza was in 2003 a large problem in the Netherlands. Half of our livestock on poultry had to be killed. But since then, we have developed outbreak management. The virus is still every year coming, but by having early warning systems, by being able to act immediately, we have prevented large outbreaks. And so we could learn from this for example, COVID-19. Also in agriculture, there is much knowledge about differences in resistance on viruses, for example, in the cultivation of agricultural crops. One question someone asked me, said, well, isn't there also some explanation from the occurrence of COVID-19 in, for example, Spain and Italy, and less strong in northern countries because of some internal resistance in northern countries people might have. We don't know that, but we know from agricultural crops that there are differences in resistance of crops in different areas of Europe. Should be something to think about. Another aspect which will result from COVID-19 is a new focus on national production. We have now seen that because of the COVID-19 transportation is diminished, and there is a new ask for national production. In agriculture, it's also, and I see import in France and the Netherlands from Spain, Italy isn't there anymore, and so they have to produce their own crops, etc., etc. This will have impact on rural areas if we are going to produce again more in our own countries. So we should think about that. And last but not least, it's by me, there's some discussion, well, we shouldn't eat less meat because one of the problems of meat is that there are the viruses which come to people. One part is that in our Western countries, production of poultry meat and pigs and calves, etc., is under very strong hygienic conditions. and there is no outbreak of viruses from these industries. So whatever you mean, think about the production of meat and in large scale about the environment is one thing, but laying a connection between livestock keeping in Western Europe and something like COVID is another thing. I just wanted to emphasize on that. That's my contribution for now.
Thank you, Jos, and then to Daniel.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for inviting me here today to speak. So, if I can have the next slide. So, I'm going to start by saying a little bit about the Rural Services Network and what the organisation does. And I'm going to give an idea of how we use open rural data and why it is important for us as an organisation. Next slide, please. So, Rural Services Network is covers the whole of England, so it doesn't cover Scotland or Wales or Northern Ireland. We are interested in a fair deal for rural communities and those serving them. So we've got service providers from councils, housing associations, fire authorities, police authorities, health services, as well as businesses. We've got over 100 local authority members, over 200 non-local authority members, businesses, health trusts, housing associations, community groups, etc. We also have partnership arrangements with Rural Health and Care Alliance and the Rural Housing Alliance, and we sit on the executive committee of the National Rural Crime Network. So as you can see, the Rural Services Network links into many of the service providers and associations serving them in the rural community. There is also, of course, the interrelation between the service providers where they work towards common goals. As an example, local authorities promote healthy lifestyle choices and with a view and healthy active transport, with a view that that reduces burden on the national health system, hopefully reducing the acquired health conditions by being active. So there's that interrelation between service providers. Next slide, please. So we're a data-driven organisation to a large extent. The data tells us what a fair position would be for rural service providers and allows us to understand the differences between both the rural and urban context, and also communities that are rural, because each rural community is quite distinct in its own right. We use sources of data from mostly from the Office for National Statistics, official statistics produced by other government departments, and membership surveys. So the data that we look at includes things such as earnings, mobile and broadband connectivity, public transport provision, access to education, health measurements. And that shows us both the rural comparison to urban, but also we like to look at and provide to our members opportunities to investigate how those sort of measures compare between similarly rural areas of England. In terms of showing fair positions, what fair positions would be, as an example, in England, local authority funding currently shows that rural council taxpayers are funding a higher proportion of their services through their council tax compared to an urban resident, and likewise receive less central government grant per head than an urban resident. So our organisation delves into the numbers there to see what a fair position for rural communities would look like. Where data isn't available through national statistics or government departments, we've got a community group of over 20,000 contacts around rural England. And so where subject matters or topics, there isn't the data available nationally, we're able to go through our membership and provide surveys to get ideas as to how that topic sits in rural England. Next slide, please. So what's really important for the Rural Services Network is having access to data at an appropriate geographic level, and also that data can be assigned to either a rural or urban classification. So councils in England are multi-tiered, each tier providing different services. The first level of local government in England are the town and parish councils, local councils, and they provide communities with a democratic voice and a structure for taking community action. We need, in the Rural Services Network, to provide our services, we need data at a geographical level that is appropriate for the context of the proposed use. Also, if the data isn't available at the geographic level we want, it's useful to have granularity that is smaller so that we can build up to the geographic area of the service provider we're looking at in comparing data sets. So the rural classification, we rely entirely on the DEFRA, that's Department for Environment, Food and Rural Affairs. They provide a rural urban classification in England, which is based on the 2011 census of population. And that is what we use for all of our analyses at the Rural Services Network. So, as I said, the geographies, we need to have the geographic level of data available to us to be able to analyse for our members. Next slide, please. So how is the data used? As I said, we represent rural areas as a whole. We also present data that we have available to us to understand rural communities and the differences between them, and we use that to provide a service to our membership so they can understand where they live. And we also provide performance analysis of service provision, which accounts for the varying rural nature of the service providers and the communities with which the services are being provided. So we use the data both to represent rural communities to government, but also more widely, through our communications, we present information, and it's important that we present accurate information that people have trust in and can rely on. Communities want to shape the places that they live, such as through schemes such as neighbourhood planning, and to be able to shape their communities, they need to have the data available to them to understand the places in which they live. So they need to get to know an area beyond their own interests and social or professional groups, and that all requires data over a wide-ranging subjects and topics. In terms of the performance analysis work that we do, it has to be reflective of the rural circumstance, and so we use the DEFRA classifications for local authorities for like-to-like comparison. Next slide, please. So what's really important to us is having the access to the data, data sets available, the timeliness in which the data sets are available, in terms of it's not useful to have a large lag between data collection and availability, since we need, or communities and service providers need to make timely decisions based on data. So timeliness of data access availability is quite important. The transformation of data, where data collections, the timing and the different levels of data that is being collected, where data sets are changing and collection of data is being changed. As an organisation, we need to be able to engage and provide our views and experience of how we use the data to the organisation that is collecting that data, so that its future use is assured for our purposes. And then, of course, quality. We need to be assured that the data is of the quality that we can rely upon and our members can rely upon. A lot of the data that we use comes from online portals, and that's available at a click of a button, which is fantastic for us. The current priority now is the data available to understand and react to the impacts of COVID-19. So there are many processes that are changing within society: social distancing processes, reduced business activity, the health and well-being consequences of those things, and of course the mental health and education of children, since schools have been shut down in England. And each community has its own distinct attributes, and to assess the impact of COVID-19 requires data to be available in both covering all of those important aspects of access, timeliness, transformation and quality. So data that I'll be using in the near future is going to be used to move communities forward from this moment in time with clear direction and purpose to rebuild and hopefully get to a better place as communities than we were before. And that concludes my little snippet of the presentation.
Thank you, Jos, and thank you to all our speakers. I'll take this chance to open the recommendations that were provided also for the open data rural gap. And I would also like to open the floor to the participants who are still here to ask their questions to the speakers.